Okay, guys, we're going to talk a little bit about conversions, and we're going to talk about how to go back and forth between fractions, decimals, and percents. And so I did want to give you just kind of a short little screenshot of kind of the methods of going back and forth. So from decimal to percent, if I want to switch, I would multiply it by 100 to get to my percent. If I'm at a percent and want to go to my decimal, then I would divide by 100. So I've kind of put this on here to kind of give us a good way of being able to reference how you can kind of go back and forth. So, feel free to take a screenshot. I did put a screenshot in the Google Classroom that's there along with this video. Will go there as well. So as we start to go back and forth, let's kind of do some examples so you can kind of get how it works. So with converting from decimal to percent, remember, this is the one where we're going to take our decimal, and to go to our percent, we're going to multiply it by 100 to be able to get it there. So on the first one, I have 0.74. So I'm going to take that and multiply it by 100 to get to the percent. So that's going to be 74%. Some people like to remember that basically that means that you're moving the decimal to the right 2 places. Okay, so moving it 2 places or multiplying it by 100 is going to give you the same thing. So let's take a look at this one. I have 0.82. If I do my multiplying by 100 to get my percent, that's going to give me 82%. Now again, if you want to think about it as moving your decimal 2 places to the right, you'll still get the same answer. Okay, I have 0.53. Multiply it by 100 to get my percent. It's going to be 53%. So out of all the conversions we do, that's probably the easiest one. So let's also talk about going backwards. So if I want to go from a percent to a decimal, instead of multiplying by 100, I'm going to divide by 100. So if I have 54%, I'm going to take 54 and divide it by 100 to get my decimal. So that's going to be 0.54. Now again, like we talked about that, moving your decimal, and 54%, I assume the percent is at the end, or that decimal's at the end. So this goes 2 places backwards. Okay, so it goes to the left this time. Okay, so if I have 67%, take 67, divide it by 100. So it's going to be 0.67. If I have 54, divide it by 100. It's going to be 0.54. So as we're kind of going back and forth, it kind of helps us just to be able to have kind of the method to use. So let's go to our next one. If I have a decimal and I want to make it a fraction, I'm going to follow this part. So I'm going to make my fraction using my place value. So if I look at this first one, I have 0.52. So in my fraction, that's going to go on the top. And then this is tenths, and that's hundredths. So you look for the last spot. So if that's in the 100th spot, that means in the bottom of your fraction, you're going to get your 100. So I have 52 over 100. Now the big thing is, do make sure at the end that you reduce if you can. If you can't reduce, then don't worry about it. But at least at some point you should do this. Now I did suggest for a couple of you that were still kind of struggling with that reducing, that you could definitely go through and use your Desmos to do that. So if I did 52 divided by 100, it still gives me the decimal, but you're going to want to go in front where that little blue bar is, the little circle button there, and it's going to reduce it for you. So that'll give you the chance to be able to use that if you're still kind of struggling with that. Okay, so if I have this set up, then that means it's going to be 13 over 25. Okay, so let's look at the next one. I have 0.54, so I want to go to the last spot. It's my 100th spot. So it's 54 on the top and it's 100 on the bottom to make your fraction. And then we're going to try to reduce. So 54 over 100 is going to give us 27 over 50. Now again, if you want to use Desmos, you can either use the free app or you can go to www.desmos.com, but either one is perfectly fine. Okay, so let's take a look at one more maybe that's not on here. So what if I have this? So 0.127. So I look for the last spot, that's in the hundredths. So it's 100 or 1,000, excuse me, on the bottom. So it's in the thousandth spot. And then it's 127 on the top. Okay, so if we go to our reducing like we were doing before, 27 divided by 1,000. You'll notice this one doesn't change when you hit that button in front because it's already in the most reduced form it can be. So that means this is going to be kind of my final piece. Okay, so now let's take a look at, let's see, percent to fraction. So if I want to go from percent to fraction, I'm going to put my percent over a denominator of 100, and I'm going to simplify. So this one I have 34%, so it's going to be 34, and I always put it over 100. And if I plug it in and reduce, I'm going to end up with 17 over 50. Okay, you do need to make sure every time it's always going to be 100 in the bottom. And the big thing, remember, every time you have a fraction is you do need to make sure that you reduce if you can. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a fraction that maybe looks a lot bigger than it really should be. Okay, so I have 78%. So 78 over 100. So if we go to our reducing, this one's going to reduce to 39 over 50. Okay, last one we're going to look at from this section. So 59% is going to be 59 over 100. And if I put that in my calculator, it's not going to reduce anymore. That's going to be the final piece. Okay, now fraction to decimal. This is a little bit different. So if I have to go fraction to decimal, I'm actually going to have to divide out the actual fraction I have. So if this is 30 over 50, I'm going to have to do 30 divided by 50, or excuse me, 3 divided by 50. So that's going to give me 0.06. So physically, you're putting in the calculator 3 divided by 50 to get the actual decimal. So just use your calculator to do that. You do not have to do that by hand. Okay, so the next one is 5 divided by 20. So 5 divided by 20 is going to give me 0.25. And then this one is going to be 40 divided by 50. So I get 0.8. Okay, one last piece is our converting our fractions to percents. This is where we're going to use a little bit of what we had with our proportions. So you always start out with your fraction that you have, set it equal to, and you're always going to put 100 here and an x here. So every single time you set these up, this is going to be there every time. So it's always whatever your fraction is equals x over 100. And then we're just going to use the skills we did when we went through and solved proportions before. So we want to find the first way that we can cross multiply with the variable. So 25x. And then we're going to get the other pair here. So 6 times 100. And we know if we take this 6 times 100 and put it in our calculator, that's going to give us 600. And then just like the last section, to get this alone, I've got to get rid of this. So instead of multiplying by 25, I'm going to divide. And that's going to give me 24. Okay, let's try one more before we call it good here. So this one is 1 over 20. And you set it up with always x over 100. So I've got to cross multiply. Here's my direction that has my x, my variable. So 20 times x. Then in the other direction, I have 1 times 100, which is just going to give me 100 when I multiply those together. Okay, again, I'm going to get x alone, so I got to get this off of there. So I'm going to divide both sides by 20. So I get x equals 5. Okay, again, don't be afraid to go back and refer to the picture if you need some help making sure you've got the conversions down the right way.